very interesting and exciting session for a lot of us, and it's certainly something that's going to be very important as we move forward. So the session's focused on artificial nesting. We have 3 speakers for the session, and each going to have 15 minutes, and depending on time, we'll have some questions after each speaker, or we'll pile them all up towards the end and have a Q&A session towards the end so that we can have the 3 speakers on a panel and answering questions all together at the same time. It's a really interesting area, and what do we know about the success of artificial nesting, and what sort of things should we be thinking about and considering before we go installing nest boxes? Our speakers that you're about to meet are going to give us a lot of insight and information in that regard, and it's going to be a really good session for anyone interested in artificial nesting for glossy black cockatoos. All right, so our first speaker is Karleah Berris, and Karleah's with the Glossy Black-Cockatoo recovery program, and she's going to talk about artificial nesting on Kangaroo Island. And Karleah's been working with Kangaroo Island Glossy Blacks for quite some time now, and working on the recovery program and etc. since 2015. In this role, managing the long-term conservation and monitoring program for the species. She's also worked on research programs, including conservation biology of translocated populations of greater bilbies, fire management and bandicoots, and population dynamics. Karleah's professional interests are testing and monitoring the effectiveness of innovative conservation management actions. And over to you, Karleah.
Yeah. Thank you for the introduction, Adrian. Now I'm going to try and share my screen. I am on Kangaroo Island, so I'm expecting technical issues. Let's see how we go. Let's see how we go. Can everyone see this screen?
Yes.
Or can anyone?
And
okay. This is
and I can't see any speaker notes, so it's fabulous.
No, I don't have any speaker notes. I deleted them all, so hopefully. All right, let's try this. I'm Karleah Berris. I work for the Kangaroo Island Landscape Board with the Glossy Black-Cockatoo recovery program. I'm coming to you from Kangaroo Island, also known as Kartapintinga, which is an important spiritual place to the Kaurna, Ngarrindjeri and Narungga groups on the mainland. At the moment, I work with Torrin Wells and Sandra Lee. They're my colleagues who work on this program. Mike Barth also worked with us until 2021, and Trish, who spoke before, also worked on the recovery program previously as well. I'm going to be talking about mostly artificial nest boxes and how they're being used on Kangaroo Island, and hopefully providing some insights that might help you guys on the East Coast. I'll be drawing on a lot of data, though, from the life of the recovery program. So a lot of this data is being collected not just during while I've been here, but also previously back to the mid-1990s. All right, I'll just check that everyone can see I've changed my slide now.
We can, yep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is amazing. So I'll just give you a really quick background on KI glossies first. Otherwise, I feel like the rest of my talk won't make sense. So in the mid-1980s to 1990s, there was there'd been she-oak habitat loss on the mainland, and glossy had gone extinct on mainland South Australia in about the 1970s. There was still a remnant population on Kangaroo Island, but what they found in those mid-1990s is when they looked at flocks of glossies, there was very few juveniles and immatures in the flocks, which led them to then go find nests and work out why there was such low recruitment, which is how they found out that brush-tailed possums were actually predating on most of the eggs and nestlings. So there was only about a 20% success rate of eggs making it to fledging at that time. This led to the start of the recovery program in 1995 or 96. And the main action to start with was finding nest trees and protecting them from possum predation. So what you can see in the middle of my screen there is a really nicely protected tree. Those little yellow people at the bottom, that's Mike Barth and Torrin Wells. So the glossies are nesting in these really huge trees, and what's been happening over the past almost 30 years now is putting tin collars around the base to stop possums climbing up. But then in continuous forest, what we're also doing is climbing up the trees and pruning the canopy so possums can't jump from adjacent trees. So it's quite a it's been quite a labour-intensive program. But that worked incredibly well. It increased nesting success rates from 20% to more than 50%, between 50 and 60% mostly. And in addition to that, there's also been a focus on increasing the habitat overall. So one way of doing that is by putting out nest boxes, and the other has been to plant she oaks. And so those are the three main actions that have been happening on the recovery program. And that led to a pretty dramatic increase for a bird that only has a maximum of one nestling per year. So the flock count in 1995 was 158. These are all minimums. To approximately 400 we estimated in 2019, and our counts now are in the 400s. So I'll go into our nest boxes that we actually use on the program. So most of our nest boxes now are those 300mm PVC pipe nest boxes you can see on the left there in picture A. Picture B and C is a female and then the nestling in the nest boxes. But post-fire, we also had quite a lot of cockatoos sent over to us. We did modify them. We got the Serpentine Jarrahdale Landcare group to modify them for us when they built them to include lids. Roofs are really important for our nest boxes because our glossies are nesting through autumn and winter, and open nests, whether they're nest boxes or natural tree hollows that are spouts, don't tend to do that well. The nestlings get rained on and they get exposure and that sort of thing. So at the very early years of the program, there were about 56 nest boxes installed by the year 2000. At the end of 2017, we had 129 installed, so we had quite a big nest box program. But then we lost probably, I think it was 35% of our nest boxes during those fires in 2019-20. So we've been installing nest boxes again. We're back up to 110 at the moment, but the reason it's a bit lower is we've also been removing nest boxes that have been sitting in the field for 20 years and not had any glossies nest in them. And that's something I'll talk about too, about the importance of nest box location. So this is from a paper we published in IBIS a couple of years ago, that nest box use has increased over time. So what we've got in that graph in the middle, and my sharing things in the way. So the grey bars are sort of the earlier years data, so early 2000s data, and the orange bars are 2013 to 2017. And you can see nest box use was only about 20% of nest boxes were being used in those early years, but that's gone up to about 45% just before the fires. Tree hollow use hasn't changed much in that time compared to our monitored trees. So it does look like they're increasingly using nest boxes over time. As Trish spoke about in her talk, though, the population has increased over time, so it could just be due to that. We did a bit of a mixed model analysis to see what was the factors that were influencing nest box use. And what was really interesting is that distance to another nesting glossy black-cockatoo pair was by far the most important thing. So in that forest plot on the right, that's the thing right up the top. No, that's the thing. No, it was actually nest. No, where is it? Nest distance. Third one down, 0.29. It had a really big influence on nesting success. Use of a nest box. So they really want to nest in proximity to other pairs in their flock, basically. The other things that had a really big influence were whether yellow-tailed black-cockatoos had used that nest that year. So they have a bit of overlap here on Kangaroo Island. The yellowtails start nesting about November and then are going through into the early glossy season. And all that really meant was if a yellowtail was occupying a nest at the start of the glossy season, quite often a glossy would just find another nearby nest. But we do have quite a few records of yellowtails and glossies both successfully using nests within a year. And the other thing that was really important is whether it was used in the previous year, which just indicates the high nest site fidelity over here. So basically, if you have a nest box that has been used last year, it's 6 times more likely to be used this year than an unused nest box. But certainly distance to other nests was really important. And so all that analysis was done on our nesting data from pre-fire, and we did that really quickly because we wanted to try and work out where to put nests post-fire. So we lost heaps of nesting habitat, and when I say lost, like trees completely burnt down. There's one of our nest boxes on the ground there. We lost both natural hollows and nest box trees. And just that photo on the right is sort of the scale and extent of the fires of what we saw in some areas of Kangaroo Island. So we've had 70 new nest boxes installed since 2020. Some of that is replacing damaged nest boxes, pulling down old ones that were becoming non-functional as well. So it's not all just fire replacement nest boxes. So this is a paper we've just published in Austroecology. And what we sort of found is that in that 2019-2020 bushfire period, hollow loss that year, now this is of natural tree hollows that we recorded glossies using and had been monitoring the use of them. 64% of their monitored hollow-bearing trees in the burnt area completely burnt down, like completely destroyed, tree gone. And that is much higher, as you can see from that graph on the right there, than the trend that we'd had in the 22 years prior. And before the fires, so 3/4 of those nest hollow trees, the natural trees, were located in long unburnt woodlands. So the problem we have now is tree hollows tend to be more in our long unburnt areas, and we have very few of those left now on Kangaroo Island, particularly in that big tree country. So we have nest boxes have sort of come to the rescue. This graph is sort of showing what has been happening in just our burnt areas pre and post fire. So pre-fire in that western half, I'll just go back. On that western half of KI, you can see the fire was mostly on the western half. And we used to have lower nest box use on the western half of KI compared to the east, just because we thought we had more natural tree hollows out that western end. It's really big tree country, sugar gum country. So nest boxes were slightly lower in use on that western half before the fires. About 30% per annum were being used. Post-fire, that's jumped to 60% of our nest boxes out there per annum are being used. So it's really significantly increased post-fire. And I guess we're just putting that down to the loss of natural tree hollows across the environment. But I guess, you know, the other thing that strengthens that argument is that we have lost lots of hollow-bearing trees, and that's having an impact is just how many other species are now using our nest boxes. So we've always sort of recorded yellow-tailed black-cockatoos using our nest boxes as well. We're getting increasing numbers of barn owls, increasing numbers of shelducks and wood ducks. We've always had issues with European honeybee hives, which we manage for, and then galahs, little corellas. But interestingly, post-fire out west, smaller species like crimson rosellas have started increasingly using our really big cockatoo nest boxes, which has now led us on a bit of a side trail. We're also providing nest boxes for some of those species now to draw them out of our glossy boxes, not so much because they're an issue. I mean, they nest a bit earlier than glossies, but we have our crimson rosellas over here are a separate subspecies. They're classified as vulnerable post-fire. And in those pictures right down the bottom, you'll see on the right there's two pictures, one of the crimson on top of one of the cockatoos, and then a bird of prey actually came in and ate all her nestlings, which was really, really sad. I guess nest boxes, from what I've said, sound awesome, and I bet you're thinking, great, let's put them up everywhere. But I also want to bring up how much time we actually spend managing this nest box program. So at the moment, we have 110 functional nest boxes across Kangaroo Island. That's slightly down from our peak in 2017. And part of that is because we're trying to just now have nest boxes where they're actually being used. We're pulling down ones that have been out for 20 years and never used and aren't near any of the other flock where they're nesting. So we have made our nest box program a bit tighter, so we're not trying to manage so many nests. But every single one, natural hollows and nest boxes, need to be protected from possums, or you get really bad nest success. I mean, brush-tailed possums are present on the East Coast, so I'd probably urge that looking into nest success over there is something that would be really important as well, because the impact of possums over here is huge. And generally, if we start finding eggs and things are going missing, we'll usually find that there's a possum has somehow found how to access our tree. But there's other species we're dealing with too. So in order to keep nest boxes available for glossies, we're currently spraying the internal lid of our nests about 3 monthly with a permethrin-based spray to deter feral beehives. We've had such an increase in galahs, little corellas and ducks using our nest boxes that we're now capping most of them between August and December, which is the galah little corella breeding season. And we also just have really annoying other birds like galahs that even when it's not their breeding season, they'll hang around the nest and just pull all our wood chips out of our nest boxes. So we're constantly replacing the internal nest contents so that the glossies aren't nesting on a plastic floor. So I guess lessons from Kangaroo Island. So we've got really high rates of nest box use here now, particularly post-fire, which indicates to me that we do have a nest hollow shortage on Kangaroo Island, and other places in Australia might not have the same shortage of us. So if you're putting out nest boxes and they're not getting used, there's probably a few different, it could be one of three reasons, I reckon. It could be that you've got enough hollows in the surrounding area and that they're quite happy with the natural hollows that they're in. It could be that the nest box isn't installed in the right place, and possibly taking into account the proximity of those other flock members could help improve use of nest boxes. But it could also be if you're putting out nest boxes and you're getting other species coming into them, we actually have to check our nests, because if we get ducks, for example, raising a brood of ducklings in there, they quite often leave a heap of rotten eggs afterwards, and glossies we've found don't tend to like nesting on top of, you know, the remains of another nest, like rotten duck eggs and things like that. So if you've got other birds fouling up nest boxes, owls as well leave heaps of pellets in nests, and glossies don't tend to like using them after that. So we're constantly cleaning out our nest boxes so they're clean and available for glossy black-cockatoos. So most of our nests we're having to climb to multiple times a year, 3 to 5 times a year we're climbing up to them to deal with these sorts of issues caused a lot of the time by other species. So I guess final words, I've spoken a lot about nest boxes, but I thought I'd bring in some of our other data here that I haven't spoken about, because it's also sort of relevant to where you're putting nest boxes. And it certainly has been for us. So over the life of our project, we've observed that Trish sort of brought up a map of KI and how we've got different flock regions. We've got a lot of leg-banded birds in our population, so we're able to look at where birds are hanging out over the year. And what we've found is flocks will sort of be in areas for a breeding season, and quite often some of those flocks will have a non-breeding area that they go to at another time of year. So if you're seeing glossies in the non-breeding season, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good place to put nest boxes. That's something that's been tried here, and then they just bugger off again back to their nesting site and don't use the ones we put up. We have recorded movement of 10 kilometres or more from nests to feed sites within the breeding season. So where you're seeing glossies feed in the breeding season doesn't necessarily mean that's where they want to nest either. Our current management is very much to follow the birds. So we find where the birds are looking to naturally nest, and then we put nest boxes there. Post-fire, I think, in the question that we had earlier, I brought it up, but we are seeing lower numbers of pairs breeding in areas out west where they've had their food availability lowered, but the nest success is exactly the same. So the pairs that are choosing to breed are still having really good nest success of about 60%. And when I was talking about those breeding and non-breeding sites, some of our movements from breeding season to non-breeding season have been up to 70 kilometres between breeding foraging patches and non-breeding foraging patches. That's the maximum, but it's quite a long way. So they can move a long way from their breeding grounds in the non-breeding season. And I guess a big thing for us is what we've seen after the fires is that the distribution of glossies is very much more driven by their food availability than nesting habitat, and ensuring there's adequate feeding habitat is really the first priority. So observation of glossies feeding at a site doesn't necessarily mean it's where they want to nest. But where we have had a little bit of limited success out east is actually looking for where they're roosting at night during the breeding season, and then putting nest boxes there. So quite often they're going back to roost in these big tree countries and in areas that they feel safe in the evenings, and putting nest boxes there. We've had some success on Eastern KI with them using nests there where there's never been any natural nests before. We've only got 2 sites where that's happened. But yeah, both of those were roost sites prior to us putting nest boxes there, and now they're really successful nest sites. And that's all my slides. On this final slide, though, I'd just like to thank the organisations who have funded us post-fire for us to carry out a lot of this work, which has been Worldwide Fund for Nature Australia, the Australian Government and Nature Foundation.
That's excellent. Thanks, Karleah. That's very good. Very good. We've got a couple of questions and we have got a little bit of time, so let's make the most of them. Question from Daniela was, re the nest maintenance. How much work is this each year, and what do you suggest for places where this kind of intense work isn't possible? Is it best to not put them out if we can't maintain them properly? Would it become a threat to glossies or other species if they're not being maintained and monitored? And example, like if the internal ladders fail and floors rot out and those sorts of issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess it depends on how long post-maintenance it is and what sort of issues you're encountering. So we've got pretty sturdy ladders in now, but previously our old nest boxes, we were having issues with ladders failing and things like that. They were having to get checked quite regularly. Yeah, it's hard. It depends. It also depends on what other species you've got in your area using the nest boxes. So if you don't have a heap of owls and ducks getting in there, your maintenance period can potentially be reduced down. But you know, because we've got owls and ducks fouling up nest boxes, we're having to look quite regularly to make sure they're in a good state. Bees are the other issue, probably. Yeah, we used to have issues with unused glossy nest boxes that were not in the areas that glossies were liking to nest, being taken over by bees time and time again. And we we're doing all this maintenance on them, but to no avail because glossies weren't really interested in those areas. So they're the ones we've pulled out. We spend a lot of time climbing nests and maintaining them. So it's not a set and forget sort of thing at all with nest boxes. And I would almost say that with natural tree hollows as well. They change over time, and we'll find glossies will use a hollow year after year until something goes wrong, like it gets fouled up by another species or the base drops out too low for them, and then they find something else. So yeah, it's really keeping those nest boxes functional is what's going to ensure that they do actually get used.
Yeah, excellent. Another question from Leanne, she's got a property of 120 acres and she's got lots of large trees on there with hollows, but she's interested in what is the glossy's choice of hollows, height, size, and those sorts of elements. What makes a good nest box size or a good hollow size?
Yeah, so nest box and hollow sizes, we've based the nest boxes on the typical hollow size we see here, which is sort of a diameter of about 300 mils, but they're quite happy with the 400 millimeter cockatoo size as well. Our glossies, I found it interesting that over in the West, when I went over there and saw what they were doing with carnabees, that they could make their nest boxes deeper and deeper, and the carnabees really like that. Glossies don't tend to like nests that are deeper than a metre. And where we found that they'll stop using natural hollows, where it's been a really, successful natural hollow year after year, and then suddenly they stop using it, we've actually had people climb up and look at it and then realise the base has dropped and rotted out further. So when material has been put back in there to raise the base back to sort of half a metre, the glossies will then come back and use it again. So they're not a species, I think, well, our Kangaroo Island ones anyway, that like really deep hollows. They're generally most our nest boxes, the wood chip floor to the nest entrance is about my arm length, 50 centimetres.
All right. Yeah. No, it's all good. It's all good stuff, and it's certainly, we're all learning as we go along as to what it is, what are the secret recipes that are needed. And yeah, you guys have certainly led the way with that sort of stuff. And yeah, a lot of us drawing on what you've learnt down on Kangaroo Island for trying and exploring for what we're doing up here in southeast Queensland and other places around the species range.
I feel like we're just really lucky because our birds feel quite concentrated. So they flock up into really big flocks in the non-breeding season. They nest communally. So for us, it's probably easier to find them because they don't seem quite so spread out. And we're on an island. We're geographically isolated. There's only so many places they can go here.
Mm-hmm. Conscious of time, there's a lot more questions that have all come in on the chat. If you've got opportunity, if you want to answer any of those questions direct in the chat, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, we'll do.
And we'll probably get to a few of those at the end of this as well. So we'll take it from there. All right. Our next speaker is David Brook. He's a founder of Wild B&B, and they're good friends of the Conservancy, and we're very grateful for the support that we've had from Wild B&B over the years. David's going to discuss the observations of natural nests used by glossies in the northern rivers, as well as the big tree and hollow audit, which is forming the design of the artificial hollows. And this is going to answer a few of the other questions, so I intentionally bypass some of the questions about designs and those sorts of elements. David's based in northern New South Wales. He's a director of the Wildlife Projects Proprietary Limited, and he's the founder of Wildlife B&B. It's an organisation focused on supporting vulnerable hollow-dependent species. And Wild B&B developed large-scale projects to support wildlife post-event, and since then have conducted research and recovery programs for squirrel gliders, central greater glider, and glossy black-cockatoo. They do some fantastic work. Wild B&B work closely with bandicoots rangers from the Minyama Indigenous Protected Area, where the projects are also underway for gear or black cockatoos. David's got a wealth of knowledge to share with us, and we're really looking forward to this talk. So it's all yours, David.
Thanks, Adrian, and great to hear Karleah's presentation. You know, the work that has been done on Kangaroo Island has been critical to inform getting something started for glossy black-cockatoos up here in the Northern Rivers. We started the Glossy's Northern Rivers project at the beginning of 2022. It's a conservation partnership between WWF Australia and Saving Our Species was involved. And the project area spanned about 16,000 square kilometres, quite a big area from Evans Head and Casino down in the south of the region, up to the Queensland border, and then there are sites out west of Kyogle. The first year was focused on identifying feed trees and looking at establishing about 12 sites across the region. And the team was also identifying birds and looking at building a facial recognition database to try and track those birds. In that year, we plotted 507 feed trees and recorded 201 bird sightings. But remember that some of those bird sightings were the same birds, and we're in the process now of trying to track the individual birds. All of this was made possible through Harry Hackett's great initiative, and of course Harry Hackett's here today and is part of the Conservancy with the Glossy Squad, which was the citizen science wing of the project, because we realised that while not much was known and had been recorded about glossy black-cockatoos in the Northern Rivers, that people, individual landholders and wildlife photographers and bird nerds and people had that information, and we needed to try and extract that to build a picture of what was going on with glossies in this region. Mike Barth, who's also here and part of the Conservancy, provided advice to the project team. And with Harry, they held a heap of workshops around the area, boosting the knowledge of glossies, and they conducted a lot of the field work. We had about 20 people working on the project. Prior to the 2023 breeding season, so just at the beginning of last year, a decision was made to install hollows at the 12 sites. The strategy was to install the hollows in the vicinity of known feed trees, and at one site where we'd identified a natural nest was to provide some hollows and install some hollows around that natural nest. Clusters of 3 hollows were installed, and each of them had a different design, so that over time we might be able to generate some data in relation to hollow preference, particularly artificial hollow preference. This year, 2024, we've installed additional hollows, mainly again at known feeding sites. It's the only strategy that we had to work with. But so far, the project has 97 installed hollows being monitored and maintained, which is a big job. And out of the 97, there are 17 cockatoos, and these have been modified, like the ones on KI. There's 6 PVC hollows, and they're based on the KI models. There's 41 ply nest box sized hollows, 22 3D printed hollows. So we 3D printed hollows out of environmental waste plastics, basically, with a double skin thermal insulated wall, trying to replicate some of the characteristics that we were finding of large hollows, particularly in stags, vertical hollows that were being used by glossies. And there are also 11 what we call hunks of trunk. So the hunks of trunk are huge, big hollows carved out of reclaimed and rescued logs, once again to replicate natural hollows being used out in the wild. So there were 5 different designs in the project. The project team is also monitoring 3 natural nests at the moment. In the first year that the hollows were installed, so 2023, glossies were observed at 7 of the 12 sites and in the vicinity of the hollows. So we just make an assumption that they know that they're there for future use, but there was some a bit of backup for the strategy that we had put hollows where the glossies were going to be, which was our only option. Cameras mounted on the hunk of trunk hollow installed in the vicinity of a known nest site captured prospecting activity from 2 female glossies earlier this year over a 4-week period. And the image behind me is the glossy checking out the hunk of trunk hollow for size. And each time the glossies moved in, they chewed some chips off the hollow and created more nesting material in the base. We have all of that documented. It was quite an interesting process. That bird ended up laying her egg in the adjacent natural hollow, and a young juvenile successfully fledged. But we know that at least 2 female glossies have checked out one of those hunk of trunk hollows. There's also quite a bit of yellowtail black-cockatoo interest, particularly in the hunk of trunk hollows. And as Karleah said, there's a range of other species using these hollows. About 30% of the ply and 3D hollows were occupied by gliders, predominantly squirrel gliders. And we're in the process of installing glider-specific rear entry nest boxes around those areas to coax the gliders out of the hollows and give them a safer place to be. We've also had Australian wood ducks observed nesting mainly in the PVC hollows. And they tend to abandon some of the nests, so we have to get in there and clean out the eggs and maintain them every year. But the hollows have also been occupied by Australian outlet nightjars, Australian boorbooks, mouse owl, and Australian barn owls. The natural hollow that this bird behind me is using and has used this year and 2 years ago is about to fall down. So we hope that having other hollows in that vicinity mean that that's a bit of an insurance policy and can provide some options for that bird to continue to nest at that site. The plan is to increase surveillance at the project sites and hollows over 2025 and learn as much as we can about the different species using them, but particularly any interest in prospecting activity from the glossies. And the focus of the project for the next year is to also find as many natural nesting sites as practicable and to continue to identify and track the birds. And as Adrian mentioned, we work closely with the Minyamai Rangers, the Banjalang clan from the Minyamai Indigenous Protected Area. The women rangers have nominated glossies as a culturally significant species and have taken a lead role in a lot of the field work, and they'll be expanding that work across the Northern Rivers as this project becomes an Indigenous-led project for the future years. we look forward to sharing any learnings and knowledge with you over time. It's early stage, but we feel that we're starting to generate the early parts of getting a picture as to the state of glossies in this region and trying to narrow down on some of the challenges, the specific challenges impacting their survival. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Thanks, David. That was great. And on time. Very well done. Very well done. There's no questions posted for you yet. Oh, yeah, one's just come in from Roxanne. So, hi, David. How did you develop the 3D printed models to best replicate natural glossy hollows? What kind of variables were looked at and how were they implemented into the final design?
So size and shape, thermal properties mainly, and then we also reference some of the artificial hollows that have been used, particularly the ones on Kangaroo Island, to make sure that some of those characteristics were consistent. The 3D printing gave us the opportunity to change each time. We wanted to modify them. They have a large hardwood perch that comes out of the front of the hollow, which is also a sacrificial perch if the birds need to create some chips and sharpen their beak and all of the behaviors around that. We've put in 2 and sometimes 3 different ladder options so that we're very, very conscious of the safety and the ability for the birds to get out, the young birds to get out particularly. And it's an ongoing project. We've been working with the 3D printed hollows for a whole range of species for about 3 years. And we're just finalizing a report on where those are at the moment. The uptake's been very encouraging, and we've had owls nesting in them and a whole lot of different animals using them. And we just decided that it was a good idea to print some of these big hollows to put into the mix, the design mix, just to see if we, over time, can determine preference from Glossy Black-Cockatoos.
Excellent. No, it's very interesting. I'm very interested from what Karleah was talking about of putting caps on the nest boxes on Kangaroo Island, and we're looking at the photo behind you, which is an open to the sky nest box. You got any thoughts on the differences that might be happening there?
Not yet, only that we don't have any recorded observations of glossies prospecting the other designs, but they did like this. This one is very similar to the natural hollow, which is only about 15 meters away, that the birds have been nesting in historically. So we just tried as close as possible to replicate that. But there's also a 3D hollow and a ply hollow all in that same cluster. And there's an Australian owlet nightjar in one and gliders in the other. This is a small data set. We just had 2 birds that have been prospecting and they've both chosen this open top hollow. But we have a larger data set with yellowtail black cockatoos, and they like these open top hollows as well. We haven't had any interest from the yellowtails, the covered hollows.
Yeah, and it's probably very likely just it's our dry season when they're breeding a lot of the time, so it's not as critical as what's happening down on Kangaroo Island as far as rain and rainfall events go. Very last question for you from Lauren. How do you monitor all these hollows?
What was the question, Adrian?
How do you monitor all of the hollows?
We travel a lot of distance. So they're monitored with we have a 15-meter extendable pole camera. And there's a process that Mike Barth has taught us about how to carefully monitor the hollows and try to understand if they're a bird or any animal in them to start with. So they're all mainly monitored with our huge pole camera. And then we have a climbing team that can go up and maintain the hollows if necessary.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, David. That was very, very good. Yeah, fitted perfectly into the middle of our little session that we've got going. Our next talk is Catherine Madden. She's the Land for Wildlife Officer with the Scenic Rim Council. We're going to be talking on trailing cockatoos on land for wildlife properties in the Scenic Rim. And Catherine's been a Land for Wildlife Officer with the Scenic Rim for 3 years. Previously worked with Brisbane City Council, a position she had for more than a decade. She's actively involved in the Conservancy and served on several of our management committees prior to us becoming an incorporated organisation. Catherine's been very involved with the Conservancy over the years and looking forward to this talk. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you. Yeah, so as said, that I'm the Land for Wildlife Officer for Scenic Rim Regional Council, which is located in southeast Queensland. This program assists private landholders doing conservation projects on their land. And in 2019 and 2021, large areas of core habitat for the Glossy Black Conservancy were affected by wildfires in the Scenic Rim. And I'm trying to move to the second slide. Is that working?
It's not moving.
Okay.
No, that slide hasn't come through.
Next slide.
Do you want me to open it at my end, Catherine?
I did add some extra slides in.
Uh-huh.
Is it working now?
No.
No.
Do you want to stop sharing screen, close your PowerPoint, and then start resharing? And there's a couple of other questions in the chat, Adrian, that you might want to.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
All right. There is other questions? Oh,
From earlier on in the chat.
yeah. There was one there for David about, is there any way you can reinforce the nest box to keep it going? And I think that's referring to the hollow that was going to fail.
We've looked at that. It's a dead tree trunk. It gets more and more of a lean on it each year. And this year, as the female was flying back to feed the chick, the top of the nest was caving in and bark chips were falling on the chick. So it was a very nerve-wracking year for that hollow. There's not really, we've looked at stabilizing it using cables and a whole range of things. And I think it's the end of life for that hollow. We hope that having supplementary hollows around it will help.
Excellent. All right. How's Catherine's?
Okay, Sam, sorry, gonna have to. Thought I had it all sorted.
We can see it now. It's just not in presenter mode.
Yeah, it's just not letting me go to the next slide.
Okay, well, why don't I give it a go from
Thank you.
my
That would be
end? Yeah.
great.
That's
So
why all the
everyone.
speakers sent their presentations through. And I'll just put this into.
I did have some extra photos, but that's all right.
So go ahead, Catherine, just give me a prompt when you need to move on.
Okay, yeah, move on.
Yep.
Thanks, Sam.
Yep.
Yeah, so I guess from a response from the fire, the Glossy Black Conservancy received donations for artificial hollows to be installed in the areas where the Glossy Black-Cockatoos, where the area was affected by by fire from feed trees and habitat. So we received 21 cockatoos and were given to the Land for Wildlife Scenic Rim program to install on private lands. So this was in 2021. Since then, the cockatoos we've gotten more information from Kangaroo Island and other members of the Glossy Black Conservancy, and it came to light that the tubes needed to be retrofitted. So similar to Kangaroo Island, and also for the conditions for Southeast Queensland. So mainly the thermal insulation, the ledges, lids were installed and applied to these boxes. Next slide, please. Oh no, sorry, back, Sam. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so and you can see on this map, how did I select the sites where we put the boxes to be installed? So I gathered information from the Glossy Black Conservancy database, iNaturalist, WildNet, and Land for Wildlife members. And you can see in the blue sections, all sort of on the edge of the scenic rim, which is sort of borders New South Wales and all the Diagula ranges. They were the main areas of where previous Glossy Black sightings and nesting sites and drinking sites were. And then I contacted the Land for Wildlife members who have, told me they've got nesting pairs of glossies on their place, or they have regular visits or regular feed trees, also regular drinking sites. So you can see there's 6 stars, but there's actually I've got 7 private properties. I installed 3 boxes on each. So these were on all those sites that had regular feedings, and also adjacent to the areas that had fire, or the property had actually been affected by the fire. So 3 boxes were installed by the arborist at each site. And if you can go to the next one, Sam, there's a little Facebook YouTube clip that one of the arborists did when we installed it. Thank you.
Just bringing that up.
So it goes about a minute. Might need to unmute it on the Facebook.
Yep.
All this 5 nest box installation for Land for Wildlife today here at Skywalk Tambourine, installing cockatoo tubes. So basically we've hauled this 5 kilo tube into the tree via a pulley system up here. We've screwed it off to the tree and also put chains around it here to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, also down the bottom. And then to monitor the wildlife coming in and out, we've put a camera right here, so it's going to show us directly how active the tubes are going to be. We managed to install them about 20-25 metres off the ground, and this is the 3rd one we've done today. Very good.
Thanks,
Stop that
everyone.
quickly before Facebook. Wait,
Yeah, went to the next one.
Sorry, it has. Okay,
Yes.
back to the PowerPoint.
Thank you. So additionally to that, we also installed, just because we noticed with any sort of nest boxes, any movement, that animals just get on it and just go, whoa, got to move. So we also use that strapping tape, the silver strapping tape, to make the boxes. You can see in the top of that, in that image right there, there's like that silver strapping tape. So wherever possible, we just added extra cyclone strapping tape. If you can move to the next slide, thank you. So this project's obviously in its infancy. It's only been running, we only installed them, the first one went up in July, and a few weeks ago we sort of installed the last one. But really interestingly, at all 21 sites, 5 actually aren't working to access the Bluetooth through the camera, but we'll be able to access that data when I send the arborist up to get. But every other box has actually had something in it, on it, investigating it. Haven't had any Glossy Black-Cockatoos, but the property owners have sort of said since July they haven't seen the glossies at their property as much. So I guess as time goes on, we'll be able to see if anything sort of comes in or out, and then also from the property owners to see, you know, if they come in and investigate it. But I guess the good thing is we've got this 24-hour camera system set up on all 21 boxes. So we'll be able to see how, you know, how this is monitored over time. I really like that we've had 12 species recorded on the 21 boxes. The most sighting has been squirrel gliders at 7 of the boxes. This really interesting one spot where we've got a koala that I've obviously got his koala food tree. So I will probably go back and move that nest box out of his tree and move it to an area close by. Feathertail gliders, as well as sugar gliders and squirrel gliders. But really, also the other good thing is greater gliders have been seen in at 2 of the sites, which is a really good sort of another project that I'm working on is with greater gliders, and it sort of adds value to those other projects that I'm working on in these areas. What else can I tell you? So I guess really the sort of the main sort of take home from this project is these areas that I chose didn't really have a lot of hollows, and there's lots of animals that are using these spots, but no glossies so far. But hopefully, we'll be able to get some more information as time goes on. And I also really like the fact this is just sort of the start of the project, and I do want to build on this project. So I would like to, we had a horrible Christmas Day storm last year that was in these similar areas. We lost another lot of core habitat, and we've been salvaging the hollows from that, you know, came down in the storm, and then reinstalling them back up into the canopy. So I will be doing these in those glossy black on those 7 properties as well to be able to add value to the project. So thanks everyone.
That's really good. Thanks, Catherine. That's very good to see. And yeah, congratulations to Scenic Rim Council for taking on the initiatives and doing those sorts of work. So I wish a few more of our regional councils would have those sorts of programs underway and happening. So yeah, very well done. That is for sure. Question for you. Have you any kind of methodology that you're using with the installation, like minimum heights, maximum heights, face east, face west, any of those sorts of things that you're using? Well, I'll throw that question across to David and Karleah as well. Yeah, have you got any recommendations or methodologies that you use in minimum heights, maximum height, hollows facing east, west, north, those sorts of elements that you put boxes out in?
I've just replied on the chat. We tend to go south, southeast. They don't tend to like them if we put them north on the tree. But like I've said in the chat, we're quite far south. So, a tree on the north side, a box on the north side of a tree is going to get a lot of sunlight down here in winter and get quite warm, I reckon. And what's the other thing? Height. We are trying to install them lower and lower and lower. So they used to install them really high, like sort of 15 to 25 meters up, replicating where the natural hollows were. And we've just brought that down and down and down. I, in particular, installed one that I reckon is only about 5 meters off the ground, and Torrin was saying to me, this is ridiculous, they're not going to use it, and they've used it 2 years in a row now, so I'm really happy. So yes, but that's at one of our nest sites where we don't have many natural tree hollows. It's on an eastern KI, and they're pretty much exclusively using nest boxes there.
Excellent. What about you, David?
I think it's something that documenting. So we're installing at different heights and different aspects. It's very site specific, and we're recording all of that. So hopefully over time we'll be able to generate some data that may support this. I do remember once I was talking to Karleah about when we were first starting this project, and we were talking about heights and different things, and I'm pretty sure she said, oh, if you leave the top off the wheelie bin, they're going to nest in that. And that was in reference to getting it down low. But we're just trialing it. We're documenting it all, and hopefully we'll get some nesting success and be able to report back.
It seems we have Catherine back as well.
Yes, I'm
Alright.
back.
Yay.
Alright.
Okay, so methodology. It's more site specific. So it was about each property in the cooler gullies area around where the feed trees were. We didn't put any of the boxes due west and sort of in a more sheltered spot. It also was a little bit dependent on if there was another branch where we could put the camera on the edge to look into the hollow. And as high as you can go, as high as really the arborist could go safely into sort of the top of the junction of the spot. So they were all around sort of probably between 18 to 30 meters. And then in each box, I filled half of them up with all just local like leaf debris as well. So I don't know if that's a methodology, but that's just what we did.
Yep. All right, and there's a message being popped up from Andy, and it seems to be open to all three, but have there been any investigations into the use of carved or constructed hollows, like the hollow log method, to generate GPC nesting sites? Apart from the obvious size requirements, they may offer greater longevity than constructed nest boxes. So, yeah, has anyone tried putting chainsaws into trees and creating artificial hollows in the tree?
Yes, so I can go. One of my sites, we put a couple of hollow hogs in there, and we've also purchased one so that we'll be able to go and do it at those sites, but that will be down the track.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've just started using a hollow hog in the past 12 months as well. We're having a lot of success using it for smaller species, crimson rosellas. Just logistically carving a glossy hollow is quite difficult because it's so much bigger. And so we haven't actually tackled a glossy size. We're sort of at crimson size at the moment.
We also use a hollow hog for the last few years extensively, mainly, as Karleah said, for smaller species. To try and create a hollow the size that glossies require in a tree is pretty ambitious. We've done it once where a storm had blown the top out of a tree, and so we went down into the trunk, created a stag hollow, and that was a big exercise, but it also, you sacrifice the tree in that process. So chainsaw carving or hollow hogging to create big hollows for glossies is going to be a pretty ambitious task.
David, it might be of value just to explain what a hollow hog is, just for those who may not know the terminology.
So it's a custom-made tool that is a carving blade on the end of an angle grinder and with an extension on it. So it allows you to fairly quickly create an entrance hole into the side of a tree. We normally only use it now where a lateral branch is broken off a tree and has died, and the tree is trying to heal over that section. And that's an area that will, over time, have a hollow created there anyway. So we just are using it to advance the tree's natural ability to create hollows. But you're able to create an entrance hole, go into the tree, and then carve an area out. The sizes are referred to as a rock melon size or a soccer ball size, and you can create quite a good hollow for gliders. And with a bit of technique, you can get them a little bit deeper for a range of different parrots. It's an amazing tool, but carefully use.
All right. I've got one more question I'd like to throw out there for everybody, and that is, and more coming from Karleah and the fires and the loss of hollows and artificial nest boxes. But Has anyone trialled or experimented with non-flammable or fireproof nest boxes in any way?
We haven't. We've just gone, because our PVC ones are quite cheap to make, we just went down the route of making more of them and installing them because we can have them up really quickly.
Fair enough.
A few years ago, we started playing. Oh, sorry, Adrian. You go.
Okay. No, you go.
We started playing around with woodcrete and hempcrete. So that's using about 30% wood shavings or 30% hemp fibers in a concrete mix. So as one option, that was a post-fire little study, as one option to create some hollows to see if there was any uptake and indeed to see how those hollows survived fire and whether they would be there post-fire to provide support in species. We've paused that project at the moment, but there are some options. With the 3D hollows, we're able to put in a fire retardant additive, but we're very careful that everything we do has to be non-toxic and safe for the animals, and we only use recycled materials. So the fire retardant additive, which is readily available, still needs further testing.
Yeah.
I might just add as well, Trish just reminded me that most of our trees that were damaged in the fires, the whole tree either fell over or burnt down completely. We didn't have many instances where, like, if the tree survived, quite often the nest hollow, like the PVC nest box, was maybe slightly warped but still fine. Our biggest issue was losing entire trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was something else that we considered, was where the fire had come through previously, which was, pretty hardcore. We installed them above those we installed the nest boxes above the burn line.
Excellent. Yeah, I know on Stratty they abandoned putting up the traditional ply nest boxes, and it wasn't fire. Well, fire was one of the factors, but termites was the other factor on the island. They put a box up, and within a year it'd be half eaten and gone type thing. So they went with the concrete pipes, and they made some nest boxes out of those. And yeah, a lot of them are still there to this day and had fire go through. But yeah, I just don't know whether a concrete pipe the size that would be needed for a glossy and the logistics of hauling that up into a tree and all of those aspects are all things that need to get factored in, because it's got to stay up there. That's always a factor.